Tonight, you're going to pour yourself a drink. Maybe wine, maybe beer, maybe something stronger. You'll tell yourself it's a modern habit, a social ritual, a Friday night thing. But the real answer is far stranger. Your body was built to crave alcohol long before humans existed, long before agriculture, long before fire. You inherited this craving from an ancestor swinging through trees 10 million years ago, and it never left you. Here's where it starts. Deep in the forests of ancient Africa, before there were humans, there were primates. Small, quick, hungry primates, foraging for fruit on the forest floor. Ripe fruit doesn't stay ripe for long. Within hours of falling from a tree, sugars inside it begin to ferment. Wild yeast breaks them down, and the result is alcohol. Not much. Just a trace, but enough to matter. Why would that matter to a hungry primate? Because alcohol has a smell, a sharp, unmistakable smell that travels through the air far better than the scent of unfermented fruit. For an ancestor searching a dark forest floor for scattered, rotting fruit, that smell was a signal. It said, "Food is here. Eat now." The primates who could detect that smell and who could actually digest the alcohol inside the fruit got more calories than the ones who couldn't. They survived better. They passed on more offspring. This idea has a name. Biologist Robert Dudley calls it the drunken monkey hypothesis. His research suggests that your attraction to alcohol isn't a modern flaw. It's an ancient survival tool inherited from millions of years of primates who needed to find fermenting fruit to stay alive. You didn't choose to like the smell of alcohol. Your ancestors were rewarded for it, generation after generation, long before anyone had a word for wine. But there's a second piece to this story, buried in your DNA. Around 10 million years ago, something changed inside the primate lineage that would eventually lead to humans. A single gene, called ADH4, mutated. This gene controls an enzyme that breaks down alcohol in your stomach and throat lining. Before the mutation, that enzyme was slow. It processed alcohol at a crawl. After the mutation, it worked 40 times faster. Why does 40 times matter? Because it's the difference between poison and food. Slow processing means alcohol builds up in your system fast, making you sick before you can eat much fruit. Fast processing means you can eat fermenting fruit on the forest floor, absorb its calories, and move on with your day, barely affected. Biologist Matthew Kerrigan traced this exact mutation back through the primate family tree. He found it appeared right around the time our ancestors came down from the trees and started spending more time on the ground, where fallen, fermenting fruit would have been common. Think about what that means. The ground-dwelling ancestor who could handle alcohol had access to a food source the tree-dwelling ones couldn't touch. It wasn't a small advantage. It shaped which primates thrived and which didn't. You are, quite literally, descended from the ones who could hold their liquor. So the craving is ancient. The tolerance is ancient. But drinking on purpose, the way you do now, is a different story entirely. That part came much later, and it changed everything about human society. Around 12,000 years ago, something strange was happening in the hills of the Near East. Hunter-gatherer groups, still living without permanent homes, without farms, without written language, were doing something archaeologists didn't expect. They were building large stone basins. Basins built for one purpose: brewing beer from wild grain. This discovery came from the work of biomolecular archaeologist Patrick McGovern, who has spent decades analyzing residue found on ancient pottery and stone. At a site called Göbekli Tepe, one of the oldest known ceremonial gathering places in the world, McGovern's research pointed to evidence of large-scale beer production, long before anyone in that region was farming wheat as a staple food. Here's the question that follows. If these people weren't farming yet, why were they investing enormous time and labor into brewing beer? Grain has to be harvested. It has to be malted. It has to ferment for days. That's not a casual afternoon project for a group still relying on hunting and foraging. It's a massive commitment of resources. McGovern's theory is that beer wasn't a side effect of farming. It might have been a reason for farming. Groups gathering for feasts and rituals needed beer for those gatherings, and needed a reliable grain supply to make it. Some researchers now argue that the desire to keep drinking might have pushed early humans toward planting the very crops that would eventually become bread, agriculture, and permanent settlements. In other words, the modern world you live in, built on farming and stable food supplies, may have been nudged into existence by people who really wanted a drink. Does that sound impossible? Consider what alcohol does to a group of people sitting around a fire. It lowers inhibition. It loosens social boundaries. It makes strangers feel like friends faster. For early humans trying to build larger, more cooperative groups than any primate before them, that effect wasn't just pleasant, it was useful. Anthropologists have long noted that human societies are unusual among primates for how large and cooperative they can become. Chimpanzees live in small, tense groups defined by strict hierarchy. Humans built villages, then towns, then cities, filled with strangers who somehow learned to trust each other enough to trade, to marry, to work side by side. Shared drinking rituals may have been one of the tools that made that leap possible. A fermented drink passed around a fire wasn't just refreshment, it was social glue, binding people together at exactly the moment human groups needed to grow larger to survive. So by the time real agriculture spread across the world, alcohol wasn't a luxury invented after the fact. It was woven into the earliest ceremonies, the earliest gatherings, the earliest attempts at large-scale human cooperation. Nearly every ancient civilization that followed, from Mesopotamia to Egypt to early China, developed its own fermented drink and its own rituals around it. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern repeating across an evolutionary pressure that never went away. Now think about your own life. You didn't inherit a stone basin or a Gobekli Tepe ritual, but you inherited the biology underneath it, the fast-acting enzyme that lets you process alcohol without immediately getting sick, the nose that still responds faintly to the smell of something fermenting, the social instinct that makes a shared drink feel like an invitation to open up, to relax, to connect. None of that arrived with modern bars or bottle labels. It arrived with a primate on a forest floor and a gene that changed 10 million years ago. Here's the part that should stop you. Every time you crack open a drink at a party, every time a toast is raised at a wedding, every time strangers clink glasses and suddenly feel a little closer, you're running a program written by evolution long before there were words for any of it. The primate reaching for fermented fruit and the person reaching for a bottle at a celebration are doing the same thing, for the same reason. Finding calories, finding connection, finding a reason to trust the people around the fire. So tonight, when you pour yourself a drink, you won't just be following a modern habit. You'll be repeating something your ancestors did on a forest floor 10 million years ago, and something a group of hunter-gatherers did in stone basins 12,000 years ago, and something nearly every human civilization since has done around a fire, a table, or a bar. The real answer was never that strange after all. It was written into you long before you were born.